and let me change it to 14.
You guys can hear me, right?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah. Stream has
Okay.
started.
I don't know why, but
All right, we have
cool.
started.
What was the thing we were gonna talk about last week where I can't pull the topics up because my fucking mouse isn't working. Oh, there it is. Now it decides to work. Okay. Food regulation
Food regulation. Is that what we're
in the
going?
FDA.
Yeah, FDA, right?
Yeah. All right. So I have a hot take.
Yeah.
And that hot take is this. The FDA is hot garbage and we should get rid of it. It doesn't protect us as well as we think it does. All it does, as McGuire said so eloquently, it gives us the pretendy feely good that it does something, but
I'm pretty
actually
sure
the FDA is
I said
really
that.
bad at capturing stuff.
I said that.
Oh, well. Well, I'm going to blame McGuire anyways.
Fair
Oh,
enough.
this is slander.
So, that's my hot take. Y'all can suck my dick because
What if I
fuck the
wanna?
FDA.
What if I wanna?
Fuck the FDA or suck my dick.
Both.
All the above.
Wow.
No, I like the FDA. I like. I don't know quite like everything why I like them, but like from what I know about them, I think they do help the consumer. And I overall I just think they're a good organization. They probably do a little too much in some sectors, but overall I think they're necessary.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'll give you one example about how the FDA works. So if you want to open up a meat processing plant, for example,
Mm-hmm.
you have to have FDA inspectors there, right? Well, you
Yeah.
have to pay for the privilege of them to be there. Well, basically the only meat processing facilities that can do it are large, literally industrial scale meat processing facilities. And so if you want to open up like a small scale meat processing facility, it's either prohibitively expensive or you have to somehow come up with enough capital to become an industrial scale. It's just not possible. So I don't one major reason besides the hot take I said earlier, another reason why I don't like the FDA is it creates a barrier to entry into the market, and so that's why like Tyson Foods is basically like the meat packing plant in America. Like Tyson Foods, which is I think is out of Kentucky actually, they or Tennessee, they make like 60% of all the packaged meat in America. It's fucking wild.
Hmm.
So I don't like that.
I think some barriers in markets are good. Like when it comes to construction, you don't want them to use like the softest wood possible because it happens to be cheap, right? Having that kind of barrier is necessary for the health of the consumer, for the health of the workers, etc. Right?
I mean, maybe. I mean, I do agree with you, but the problem is that like if that was a problem, like if houses were collapsing, I don't think because people are using shoddy building material, they like people wouldn't buy it. Like you see this in China where the government literally will hire like the cheapest contractors, the shittiest contractors. The Chinese government will do this and build. They call them tofu drag buildings, and then they'll throw people in them, and then these buildings will collapse and things like that. So like
I've
I
seen
don't
those.
think that just because the government is I don't think that just because the government is involved in oversight that inherently makes it good or safe. Like governments all the time engage in really shoddy and shitty practices, and just because it has Uncle Sam's stamp of approval on it doesn't make it safer or
Well,
good anything
I
necessarily.
well I agree. Just because the government can do something doesn't necessarily mean that they should. And sometimes they are ineffective when it comes to certain things. But this is different from that altogether because the government isn't the ones actively constructing or hiring people to construct something for them, but rather they're the middleman to make sure that things are up to code. So it's not quite the same thing as that.
Maybe, but then another thing you have is market or regulatory capture, which I mean, I think you would agree that a lot of corporations do have their hands in the political process, and they will involve themselves and they will basically design the regulation that allows them to exist in the market, creating a barrier to entry, but also prevents any competitors from coming in and prevents any large scale competitors in the market from growing too big.
Yeah. Like I said, there might be too many regulations when it comes to certain things, but you would have to at least say that some regulations are okay. And while the FDA may do too much in regards to regulation, some of that regulation might be necessary for consumer health or even worker health, right?
Okay, then why don't we just have that regulation? Because I
Because,
think we can both agree that the FDA probably
well,
does
yeah,
way too much.
but our philosophies aren't quite the mainstream. They're still niche in regards to greater society. For us to
Sure.
make that kind of
Okay.
change, we'll have to change society, but society deems all these regulations necessary to function, whereas we would disagree, and they're not all necessary, but maybe just some of them are.
Okay. Well, I mean, from a practical standpoint, I do agree with you that overthrowing the FDA tomorrow would be borderline impossible. But
Yeah,
I mean, I agree with that. But like, would you agree with me that we should shrink the FDA and reform it a lot so
sure.
that it doesn't
I mean,
do it
yeah.
doesn't function the way it goes
I
now,
mean, yeah,
basically?
like even with like since I'm using housing as well, like even with housing, some of those regulations are necessary, i.e. not building out of the softest material or shoddy materials or whatever, right? But like regulations on regards to like how like height or zoning, we disagree with. So like some of those regulations are necessary, but not all of them. So we just like we're doing what we would like for housing, we could probably say the same thing for FDA or any other like regulatory organization.
Okay. Well, I guess in that regard, I agree. Although for housing, I think people should build whatever they want, and there should be liability. So, like,
Well,
I think that if someone builds a shitty house and the house comes crashing down, whoever built the house has liability for constructing that house, and
but
you
yeah,
should be
like
able to literally sue the dog shit out
if
of
I
them.
build my own house, I should be able to build it however I want because I'm personally building it. If I am building it for someone else, then like on the market, then it's something different altogether, right? Like those are two different
I
practices. One,
guess. Well, I mean,
let's
so let's say, well, I guess, but so let's say you build your own house and you build it out of this shit material that lasts only a year, but you live in the house for 9 months and then you sell it to somebody,
well, no, at
and
that point
maybe
you can sell it.
let's give
No,
you what but what I'm saying is you should be able to sell that, but like, one, it should be the liability on you for constructing that house, you Sonic, and let's say you sell it to McGuire and the house collapses on McGuire. I think you should still be liable for that.
um,
But liability
I mean,
still
sure,
exists. I mean, you still
liability.
carry that.
I mean, sure, there'd be that liability, but I don't think you would be able to. Under my ideal society, you wouldn't be able to sell that in the first place
Maybe.
because you would
Why?
have. Well, it just like how
What
if
if
a company were to build houses to then sell like immediately, they have to follow these specific rules and regulations for that market. Regardless if so I build a house out of a super soft. I don't know the softest wood from heart, but let's say it is that softest wood that only lasts like a couple months to a year. I can build it for my own personal dwelling if I wanted to, but as soon as I try to then sell it on the market, then it has to abide by those rules and regulations in which someone will come in, inspect it, find it's not up to code, and then you can't sell it.
So what if McGuire wants to buy the house though, and he knows full well, like you've explained to him in good faith, hey, I built this house really shitty. I think it has like 2 months left before it collapses. And McGuire's like, okay, I still want to buy it from you. You still don't think even then?
No.
I mean,
Okay.
the failure with that is that the consequence of the house failing doesn't just impact the owner of the house. I mean, obviously you have liability, but that only retroactively makes right any injury that happens to a third party who was not consensually a part of
Also,
this risk mitigation scheme, right? So the point of building inspections and building codes and so forth is so then the general public can have a confidence that the world around them is safe to persist in, which doesn't necessarily happen when you have to concern yourself every time you walk into a public building with, oh my God, did Walmart decide to build this out of balsa wood, figuring that it's cheaper to pay my estate for whatever liability that comes rather than construct all their stores out of oak or whatever, right? So
Yeah.
it's
Maybe.
also a public safety concern.
Also,
but Sonic, I
maybe.
know you were trying to break in.
Also, hey
Wait,
Delta,
real
hold on.
quick.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say also,
Go ahead.
I'm sure you would also agree the consumer doesn't always know what they want 100% of the time. Just because they say they want something doesn't necessarily mean they understand what they actually want and or anything like that, right? The consumer isn't always right.
Is Sonic breaking up really bad for you,
No,
A little
McGuire?
bit.
a little bit. Is
Okay,
it?
Sonic, you're breaking up really bad.
Fuck, is it my internet again? Is it fucking shitting on me?
Yeah, your internet's going shit. Yeah.
Maybe.
Okay. So let me answer both of you, and I'll answer McGuire first, and then Sonic. Okay.
Okay.
So to McGuire, I understand what you're saying. It is
Mhm.
possible. I mean, I do agree that ideally we want to assume everything is safe, but I'm gonna be real with you. Right now, your local grocery store, your local Walmart could be built kind of shitty, and you don't know that, and maybe they're just getting
Mhm.
away with it because it just hasn't collapsed yet, and it will only come out in retrospect. So like we already live in this reality where that happens anyways. So I don't see what the extra regulation necessarily helps with necessarily unless there's enforcement on it, which requires building inspectors constantly going in and out. So if you want to respond to that, I'll give you a second. The second thing is with Sonic, with yours. Um, oh, I kind of already forgot where you were. Can you say again what you were saying, and then I'll respond to it?
Basic roughly it was consumers don't always know what they want. They're not always correct in their
Oh,
purchase.
okay. Okay, I agree. I have a degree in economics, and we learn all the time about how the market has imperfect information and like
Mm-hmm.
how people really don't know what they want. But the reality is, all we can really measure is how people act. Like people can talk all day about what they want,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe they want a chocolate. They think I want a chocolate cake, but when they go and buy an apple pie, that's what they really wanted in the end. Like, and that's just how it is. Like you can't we can't live in this world where we're trying to chase this like perfect outcome where there's like perfect knowledge and perfect information. It's just not going to happen. Like we do have to live that there is uncertainty and people have to live with this uncertainty.
Well, sure, but like trying to limit that uncertainty as much as possible for the consumer, I would think is good. While it's
Sure.
impossible to fully eliminate it, I think um have like trying to eliminate some of that like as much as you can is good.
Sure. And I would say we should do that by saying, look, whenever you're entering into any sort of agreement or deal, you should you should operate in good faith. And if the other party can demonstrate that you weren't acting in good faith, for example, Sonic, you built this house. Let's
Mm-hmm.
say, like I said, you built this house. It lasts 1 year. You've lived in it for 10 months, and you go to McGuire and say, "Oh, I built this house last year, and it's going to last forever." And the house collapses, in a month or two. McGuire should be able to hold you liable versus let's say you built the shitty house and then you go to McGuire and say, listen, I built this house, it's only going to last a month, and maybe McGuire does want to enter into that contract and say, yeah, I'm fine with it, and you say you're sure it's going to collapse in a month, and maybe McGuire is like, yeah, I know, I'm completely okay with that. I don't see why we should prevent people from getting into deals like that necessarily. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying, but I don't necessarily agree because, well, like I said, the consumer, even though they may try to buy something or want to buy something, they may not necessarily know what they're getting into, and especially maybe I'm biased towards education in the U.S., but people are fucking retarded, and I don't think most people will try to trust their gut or trust their ideas on something that may not necessarily be true or whatever other situation that goes on. But the consumer isn't to always be trusted in their purchases. And I think trying to eliminate some of the hazard when it comes to that uncertainty is good, is necessary.
Maybe. Okay. I'll give you an example of how this works in real life. So, as we all know, I ride motorcycles.
Mm.
I'm a retard for doing it. Okay. And I've never purchased a new bike before ever. That's coming from a factory. I've always purchased a new bike or a used bike. And the thing that I've learned purchasing used bikes is that used bikes are really dangerous because you have no idea what the history of the bike is. You have no idea what the previous rider did to it, how they fixed it,
Yeah.
and it's not like a car where if something goes wrong and you crash into something, you're probably going to be okay because you're in a steel roll cage basically. On a bike, if you flip off the bike, you could seriously injure yourself. I sprained my knee a couple years ago laying my motorcycle down.
Yeah.
So, it's possible that someone like could have done a very routine thing, like they could have refilled the fork oil in the front forks, and they may have refilled it incorrectly, and that caused a suspension issue. When you're riding it, that could be a really big issue that could lead to a crash and could end up seriously injuring you or killing you. So, whenever I go and look at a motorcycle that I want to purchase, I go there and I wear all the gear, all my gear. I try to be as safe as possible. But I just accept that if I'm going to go on a test ride on this bike, I need to be I need to be cognizant that anything could happen and that I could crash and seriously injure myself. And I just have to be okay with that because otherwise I would never have purchased a motorcycle. I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand what you're
Like,
saying, but
life just has risk.
yeah, life does have risk, but I think sometimes trying to eliminate some of that risk is good. I'm sure for some things you can probably agree with that, right?
Maybe, but I don't like the idea of the state coming to me and saying, "No, Delta, you're not allowed to test ride this used motorcycle because we need some government inspector to inspect it to be safe." Like that's just not feasible. That's not going to
Well, no,
happen. So,
I think there's a difference in these two ideas of um, you building a house and then selling it later because you're directly responsible for the construction of that thing versus selling a used motorcycle where you didn't have, while you did use it, you didn't have any direct responsibility in the construction of that thing. There is probably some seller responsibility in regards to giving all the necessary information, but I don't see the house and the motorcycle in this context as the same
but
thing.
but you do have responsibility for maintaining it. And like I said, if you're going to sell a motorcycle, like I said, so with the suspension, I go off on the suspension because I one time rode a motorcycle that had a dangerous suspension, and I'm referencing that specifically. And you don't know this because one, you don't know much about mechanicking, but two, you drive a car and car suspensions are way different from
Hmm.
motorcycles.
Yeah.
Like if you refill the fork oil on one fork higher than the other one, you'll get what's called a tank slapper, and that will throw you off the motorcycle. And it, like I said, it could kill you. Like just go watch videos of tank slappers on the highway. Like dudes get launched like 20 or 30 feet off the bike, like into the air, and things like that. It's super dangerous. And I really don't see any difference between, maintaining a motorcycle and building a house in the grand scheme of things. Both could kill someone very easily.
Sure. But I just don't quite see how these two concepts are the same. I just one of them you have direct responsibility in not only the maintaining but the building of the house. Um, or even we can even go with just pure motorcycles. If you built a motorcycle from scratch, and then you sell it, then you have a direct responsibility for the building and the construction of the bike, the maintaining of the bike, etc. Versus buying one off the market and selling it after a year, and you're only focused on maintaining. I feel like these two things are different in regards to like how they should be regulated on a market.
Well, building and maintenance are the same, and I can tell you because I tried setting up because I'm a mechanic, or I was a mechanic, and everyone comes to me for fixing their cars and stuff. I tried when I was unemployed. I tried setting up a mechanic shop, and I literally couldn't because the insurance. Because my edge was going. One, I couldn't do it because I was going to be doing it out of my house, and that is very illegal, and I'm also very mad about that. But two, the other big thing is my edge was going to be I'm just going to be a lot cheaper than everyone else because I'm kind of a backyard mechanic, and so my shop rate was going to be a lot lower. I still could have lived off it, but my shop rate was going to be lower, and I wasn't going to like upcharge for parts or anything. So like my services were going to be cheaper. But the problem is that basically I learned the reason why shops upcharge parts and labor is because like insurance for fixing insurance for a mechanic shop is so expensive because, you know, if you fix someone's car and then they go out and they have an accident and they kill someone or they get injured or they cause, you know, severe property damage, your insurance needs to be able to cover that. And so it's super expensive. And so I kind of learned that like I basically would have no edge, and it just would have been prohibitively expensive to do it. So, and I would have had to rent like an actual shop and things like that. So it
Okay.
just wasn't going to work out, so I didn't do it.
Do you have anything to add, McGuire?
So like maintenance is the same as construction.
I don't.
Um,
I mean, I don't agree with that. But anyways, McGuire, you want to add something?
no, you can go ahead. I'm interested to hear about your counter to that here.
Oh, I mean, so
Counter
like,
me.
there's a.
Counter me.
I mean, so like if I were to go to a junkyard and then build, let's say, a car, right? Because I have a little bit more experience with cars. If I were to build a car from scratch out of those other junk cars, and then I try to sell that, I don't see that quite the same as me already having a pre-built car in a sense, my Kia, and then every once in a while I need to get maybe like one part needs to be replaced. Let's say the suspension. And I go to a junkyard and I replace that single suspension or something like that. While there is a modification of some kind, it isn't quite the same as purely building from scratch. Maintenance is more so just modifications to an already existing thing versus building it from nothing.
I guess. I mean, still.
Then we get a ship of Theseus.
Thesis,
That, but
the ship of Thesis.
Ship a
too
thesis.
late in
I
the
mean,
day here. I need another coffee.
that's literally one of my motorcycles. I have like unironically replaced almost every part on it except for the frame. So
Hey Delta.
I mean, I literally have a motorcycle
Is it the
that
same?
is the ship
Hey,
of Thesis.
is it the same? Is it the same motorcycle?
Well, you know, it's really funny.
What?
I have all of the broken parts downstairs in a box, so we could literally reconstruct the bike from the original parts.
Yeah, that's another thing with the ship of Theseus. I remember talking to my philosophy class.
Yeah.
Was all right. You replace like half the parts or the entire ship or all the parts. Is it the same ship? Either yes or no, and then make, all right. Now we have this new ship of new parts, or the old ship of new parts at least, right? I have all these old parts from that same ship, and then I make a new ship out of those. Is it the same ship? Which one's the original?
Well, the problem is the frame's different. The problem is the frame would be different because I still have the original frame.
Yeah. So
not everything is different, but I know what you're talking about. But
Yeah.
like the thing is that if let's say you did that, you would just have a busted motorcycle because everything on it would be busted. But yeah, you'd have the original motorcycle, I'd say.
But which one's the actual original? The one that has all of its parts replaced, or the ones with the old parts? At what point
So
is
it's
it
a
a
motorcycle? It's whichever one. It's whichever one has the VIN stamped on the frame.
the VIN?
That's according to the government. That's what makes it the motorcycle.
Hey Delta, what's your answer for the ship of Theseus? What is your answer for that?
Yes.
Just yes. When is it not the original ship anymore? If it ever isn't the original ship?
I don't think it's an answerable question. I think it's just a rhetorical device to explain like how the world changed and things like that. Because your body changes all the time. Like
Sure.
I think it's something like every 7 years your body has completely replaced every cell. Because I think it takes about 7 years for neurons to be replaced and things like that. So your body over 7 years will have a completely set of new cells and things like that. But
Do your brain
I mean, you
cells
are
change?
ostensibly this.
Do your brain cells
They
change?
do. They
Okay.
slowly. They do get replaced. The neurons do get replaced. It's very slow.
Okay.
But yeah, I think you are the same person. It's just like, you know, I think it's like the ship of Thesis. Like when you add a new board, that board becomes part of the ship. And when you take a board out, that board is no longer part of the ship.
And then if
It's a rhetorical. It's just a rhetorical.
and then
device.
every part is replaced, and it's still the same ship because,
yeah,
whatever reason, yeah. But then it gets to the
yeah.
point like
it's just a rhetorical device because
sure, but
that's
then
not.
but then it gets to the
go ahead.
point of now you have two ships, one of while it used to be the old boat, it is now all new parts versus the other one, which is all the old parts. You have two ships. Which one is the original? And then that one, at one point,
Yeah, I
you'd
know.
either have to say
I know.
one is or that they both are, or neither.
I know. It's just a rhetorical device. It's not any deeper than what it is.
When are you gonna make the steak, sweetie?
Aw,
I'm hungry.
so adorable.
I'm hungry.
So I
Jesus
think
fucking-
I think
okay, fuck you.
looping this back to the original conversation here on liability and so forth. I think the line of distinction between building and maintaining is kind of moot.
She's mad.
I mean, the liability is still there regardless. As your property, you have an intrinsic responsibility to make sure that it's safe for people who are entering and exiting it. So I think this enters back to building codes and so forth. The regulation I think is important, specifically with buildings, larger vehicles, things like that, because the general public is exposed to it so much. People who are not necessarily informed on the condition of the building, people who are not necessarily consenting to be in a damaged building, right? If you have a publicly available building, right, nobody's sitting down reading the real estate records to see, okay, what's the maintenance history on this? What wood was it built with, and so on. So there's a responsibility there that I think the state should enforce. That comes down to making sure that it's safe for a random reasonable person to enter and not die unexpectedly. I think you can look at the history, right? There's a drop in fire deaths as you start to see things like fire codes implemented, right? There's a reason why when we talk about terrible fire tragedies, things like the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory are still at the top of the public discourse, even though that happened 10 years ago. It's because those sorts of incidents don't happen anymore, right? Most of the major fire accidents or fire deaths, mass casualty incidents in the United States in the last century have been due to intentional arson, not accidental fires, because fire codes have come so far in making sure that the reasonable building is safe for an average citizen. So I think that there's a net benefit there that outweighs the cost of running these inspections, having these building codes in place, and ensuring compliance. I think that that there is a measurable impact that is worth the trade-off.
So one thing that's interesting about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory is that is that it like it's one of those things where like nobody. I mean, there had been fires before, but like it hadn't been so bad where people hadn't we hadn't decided as a society to figure out how to do like build fire escapes and build hey, don't lock workers into the factory and things like that. So there's a little bit of morbid on the shoulders of giants, so to speak, being built there. But so there's that. But also like just in general liability, like because I think those women they didn't they try suing the owner, and like the reason why it was a big controversy is not that like it's because there were big fires before that, but like the court basically said, yeah, you guys have no um you have no case because like you willingly entered the building and therefore you knew the risks and things like that. And the women were like, well, we were kind of misled. And so it's a little deeper than like, oh well, nobody cared about safety before, and then after we created all these regulations for safety. I think I'm pretty sure that the big reason why it was a controversy is the survivors tried suing the owner, and they the court threw it out because the court was like, you had informed consent going in and things like that, when they clearly didn't.
Sure, but I mean, you can look at other incidents. I mean, to maybe go to like Titanic, for example, right? There's incidents in history where there is knowledge on the fact that, hey, maybe we should have lifeboats on boats, or we should have lifeboats on ships, right? They improve the safety outcomes, and you can see tragedies like Titanic where this is not where this is neglected and has a massive deficit. I'm not saying that liability should be lifted. Liability should still exist, but liability doesn't recover the lives that are lost in these accidents. There is a benefit in survivability of accidents in instituting regulations that hold these authorities that, or these entities that do have, commercial interests and neglection of, safety standards, there's a benefit to instituting regulations to hold them accountable.
Actually, the
Mhm.
Titanic had more lifeboats on it than was required by law at the time, and
Yeah,
that's an
but
actual
that's
thing. But
right.
I
That's my
agree with
argument.
what you're saying.
They
But
still had a deficit, or there was still excess passengers in terms of lifeboats, right? There's been, countless maritime tragedies through history, especially in the 1850s
yeah,
to the, 1900s, because of the introduction of steamliners and this, industrialization of sea transit. So there was a clear, precedent that more lifeboats is better, right? More lifeboats increases the survivability of accidents. You can see, dozens of steamliners that have ran adrift, in Nova Scotia or whatever, and then you have thousands of people drowning just outside of, towns. And, anyways, without getting into maritime crap, the point is, right? Commercial entities, especially, will neglect safety standards because you can run the risk equations and say, well, we trust our operators, or it's so unlikely that an accident will happen that the cost of putting these in place does not outweigh the insurance. So putting these regulations in place, so then if the worst case scenario does happen, it doesn't kill everybody, is beneficial. Um, with Titanic, right, there weren't stringent enough regulations in place, and you can see the result of that. Um, and so obviously moving ahead, right, there's a tremendous amount of survivability post Titanic and post maritime disasters from a similar period because of the introduction of lifeboats. And the same thing can be said for fire codes. There's importance in mandating those things, I think.
so an interesting thing about the Titanic is that like it took something like the event of the Titanic to occur in
Mhm.
order for like, hey, maybe we should have enough lifeboats to fit everyone on board to occur, because like the prevailing theory of the reason why like the Titanic didn't have enough lifeboats and things like that is because they assumed that what would happen is people would disembark, like a third would get on the lifeboats, and then they would go to they would find a nearby ship, and the nearby ship would take on the survivors basically, or everyone, and the idea is that the lifeboats you weren't supposed to live off of them on the open ocean. You were supposed to
Mm.
use them as like a transit vehicle to another ship that would take you to
Yeah.
safety and things like that. So it literally just took something like the Titanic to be like, hey, like we need lifeboats that can survive on the open ocean for long periods of time, because those lifeboats were really rinky dink boats, and if they had to go in on the open ocean for more than a couple days, people probably would have died anyways, even if they did have enough lifeboats. So
Yeah.
it literally took something like the Titanic to be like, and that's unfortunate, but that's just like how life is. Like people do have to die to figure out how, like all the reason why motorcycle gear is so safe nowadays is because we have literally decades of people getting killed on motorcycles to say like, hey, this is how you design a helmet, and this is how you make it super survivable and things like that.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
unfortunately how it is.
throughout history, change only happens after tragedy. Um, just
Yeah,
how it always is. Change doesn't happen because it just needs to, but rather because something happens to force that change.
yeah,
Right, but
it's
I'd argue
it's unfortunate.
there's evidence, especially if you look at the 1850s, the Atlantic comes to mind, right? The SS Atlantic, which was ironically another White Star Line ship that lost, I think, over 600 people just off the coast of Canada after it ran aground. There's dozens of disasters like that where hundreds of people, if not thousands, drowned in maritime accidents. Some of these accidents surpass the death count of Titanic. Um, the issue is not necessarily that these disasters weren't happening. It was that the ship makers of the time, the ocean lining agencies and companies of the time, were not taking these disasters to heart and saying, okay, we need to implement new safety measures for
Well,
that. So that's where
the also
regulation comes into play for forcing the government's hand, and or for forcing the company's hand in doing so. Go
sure.
ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, how well televised and like well known were these other liners? Because I'd never even heard of these other liners. The
Yeah,
only one
that's the big problem.
is that how
It's
how
because
well
the
known.
Titanic was so famous.
Yeah, these other
These
ones.
were tremendously well known. I mean, They were some of the largest ocean liners of their day. I mean, these were breaking vessels. If you study the maritime history,
How many
they were
movies of Leonardo DiCaprio kissing Kate Winslet or whatever on the bow did these other ones make? Because
True.
the Titanic had them. So and that's the point that Sonic's trying to make, is that these other ones, yeah, they may have been famous at the time, but like the tragedies were just not that big, which is unfortunate. Like, I'm not saying like
but
yippee,
They were probably
these
common
evil,
enough. Well, also, you got to think the commonality of it. How common were
yeah.
these during that time versus the period up till the Titanic? That also matters too, because if something's common, it's seen as a problem, but it's not. It's almost backwards. It's only after a long period of time where nothing happens, and then a tragedy happens, in which change happens. Even if there's a lot of things that happen in succession that are the same, nothing really happens. They just be like, oh, I guess it's just life. It's just, that's just the risk for you being a part of that activity.
I mean, these were tremendously common, especially in post 1860.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Atlantic sank with 600. Then it was surpassed just like 20 years later by the La Bourgogne, and then eventually Titanic came. These were very famous accidents at the time because these were the fast ocean liners of the day that were transporting, you know, all of these specifically migrants across the ocean. They were contemporarily very famous. I do get your guys' point that like they don't live on in the historical record, but that shouldn't necessarily matter. I mean, Leonardo DiCaprio didn't change lifeboat policy in the 1920s.
Yeah.
Unless maybe we can get into time travel theory here. I mean, maybe DiCaprio does have a great jawline. I wouldn't doubt that
True.
he would split through
Well,
space time with
well,
that. But
and to back up Sonic's point even more, like, one of the reasons why the United States got into World War One is because of the sinking of the RMS Lusitania, which was
Mhm.
not even an American ship, and it wasn't even the first ship with Americans on it sunk and killed, in which Americans were killed, but like, it just got enough press for whatever reason. I forget why it got enough press, but like, it got enough press to, rile people up into supporting war against the Germans and things like that. So like, not, just because something happens doesn't mean that like it's like I said, unfortunately it took the Titanic for, the issue of lifeboats to become an issue, unfortunately.
Well, but my argument here is that it's because there's not the regular the first of all, I'm gonna maintain that these were very well known contemporary events, but second of all, it shouldn't change anything. You have hundreds of people, thousands of people drowning to death in the frigid North Atlantic. These commercial entities should see that their boats are death traps, and they
Well,
should be making a change to improve that, but they did not. And so even if we go with your guys' theory here that, you know, the Titanic was a massive enough event that it caused, you know, public outroar and action against it, that it shouldn't take that happening. These
you're
these
right.
enities know how many people are dying on their
Wait,
lines.
No,
McGuire.
you're
Um,
right. You're
Go
right.
ahead.
It shouldn't
Wait,
have to, that shouldn't
McGuire.
have to
Oh,
happen.
go ahead.
Well, I was saying you're right.
Wait,
That
wait, wait.
shouldn't be what happens, but that's just reality. It just happens anyways. Tragedy always causes
And
change.
I can give you the best example of all time. And it is a group of experts, literally everyone who worked on the space shuttle and everyone who worked
Mhm.
with the space shuttle at NASA was an expert in, some field related to rocketry and all that stuff. And the Challenger disaster happened with everyone involved knowing full well all the risks of launching on that extra cold day.
Mhm.
And specifically, I forget who makes the SRBs, but there was one engineer who specifically, he was literally like the engineer who worked on that part of the SRB where the O-ring froze. He was literally he was like frantically calling the administrators, like saying, "Do not launch. These guys will die. The rocket will explode. The O-ring will fail and the rocket will explode." And the NASA administrators, they took that information and they were like, "Ah, we're just gonna roll with it anyways," like knowing full well that this could happen because it's coming straight from the expert's mouth. Like, even people who are the best among us make really bad decisions in which people die. Like, like there's no amount of regulation or planning that can go into it. Sometimes, like, unfortunately, like, you do have to learn, through the school of hard knocks. It's unfortunate, but that's how it
If
is.
we go with your guys' theory here that Titanic changed everything, which happened because of regulation, but that aside, um, there are dozens of maritime disasters before that, just in the 50 years before that, that approach, if not exceed Titanic's death toll.
Sure.
Um, so
Well,
these should have been learned from. This isn't a situation where, oh my God, it came out of the blue. This is a known incidence of people drowning
right.
because there's just not the life support measures on the boat. So my argument here is that these entities, specifically commercial entities who don't want to spend money and increase overhead when they don't have to on, training on launching lifeboats and maintaining lifeboats and supplying these lifeboats, they're not going to unless their hand is forced. Because
Yeah.
in their minds, it's cheaper to pay for the insurance and pay for the liability
Mm-hmm.
of paying off these families when a ship does sink on the off chance that it does, instead of paying for the lifeboats. So, I mean, the argument about the Titanic aside, and I think you guys are approaching it from the wrong angle, but that argument aside, the fact still remains that without some sort of regulatory force, people will suffer because these entities act in malicious capacities for the betterment of their financial status. And this links back to the FDA, right? We can talk about meat packing operations and the Gilded Age, right, when this is largely unregulated before the Clean Food and Drug Act. This wasn't some mom and pop operation, right? You had massive commercial entities. Gustav Swift comes to mind, who are shipping cattle across the United States and disgusting, decrepit train cars, and then they're packing it with major contaminants into canned foods that are being shipped in unsafe conditions, making people sick, causing massive public health outbreaks. When you take away the regulation of the Food and Drug Act, that's what's happening, right? We have terrible commercial actors today too, but I mean, I don't have to worry about human fingers in my food, right? That was the change that came about from the Clean Food and Drug Act. You need government regulation at some level to hound in what really amounts to malicious negligence for the betterment of profit margins.
Yeah.
That is what the historical record shows commercial entities will trend to if they're allowed to, right? Corporations aren't intrinsically good, things,
No, I
right?
agree.
Yeah.
They're naturally really even going to tend towards malicious action because to be a successful corporation, you have to have some sort of sociopathic leadership at some level to grow to these sizes of these corporations, to compete on the level that these corporations do. So it's natural that you get some sort of bad effects from that. So this is where that argument for regulation comes in. But
Yeah.
I've been going for a while here. I
No.
hear Sonic wants to bub it.
Well, I was just gonna say, I
Well,
remember hearing about, at least going back to the Titanic. I always heard that the ship was supposed to be unsinkable, and it was televised and commercialized as such. This ship will never sink. This ship's not like these other ships. It will never go down. In which case, it went down, and there was massive uproar about the deaths because of that. But also, I do agree, unfestered, unregulated capitalism. Well, festering unregulated capitalism is a evil. I would even say, um, in my eyes, it's an evil that regulation tends to solve.
that like these things happen, and yeah, we can make regulations in hindsight, but like I think the only way to actually I don't think we can future predict what kind of regulations we're going to need, like especially when we
Yeah.
go into space and things like that. Like, unfortunately, like I said, that is probably have to be paid in blood to some degree. And I think we should just allow it where, like, listen, if corporations and businesses, and I agree with you, like, you won't find someone who agrees with you more. I fucking hate corporations, and we should allow people to say, listen, if a business does something to you and they didn't have some insurance or some method of preventing the injury, you should be able to sue them literally into oblivion. And I honestly think if you do that a couple of times, if you allow that to occur a couple of times, businesses will fly right eventually, because the idea of getting literally sued into oblivion would be enough to scare them. And I think part of the reason why that doesn't happen now is because there is so much regulation about, like, because there is like OSHA and required insurance and things like that. And so I think I do think to some degree that if we just took some of that away and made liability easier to go after, I think corporations would fly a little bit nicer.
Well, even
They wouldn't
in
be
Maybe,
good. They would
but
just
well, hold on.
be
Even in
more
some
risk averse.
cases, even in some cases, we can. Especially if you're an employee, there's a lot of employee insurance, especially legally. If they do something against the law in regards to how you're employed, whether it's unpaid wages or anything like
Sure.
that, you can just mass sue, and they'll.
Yeah.
But you can do this, and they do it anyways. So I don't see how mass suing ends up solving it anyways when they can probably just pay it off regardless and just keep doing what they're doing.
Well, okay, so what usually happens in most of these cases is they go to settle and they'll give you like a settlement that is
Yeah.
fairly big. It's like let's say they hurt you and they'll give you like a $200,000 settlement or something. And for a lot of people, that's a lot of money.
I
Like,
don't even say
I
for
mean,
most
I've never had
people.
$200,000 in
For
cash.
for most people, that's a lot of money, and most people, especially in court, they end up settling out of court
Yeah.
anyways. And
Yeah, exactly.
but companies
Because
are just going to do that regardless, right? You'll try to take them to court, they'll settle out of court, and you'll just take the money most likely. And this and
yeah, I
it,
know.
yeah, so mass suing doesn't work.
Well, but it's because of because people are themselves risk averse because they see the $200,000 or whatever
Yeah,
and that's the most money they've ever seen in a
yeah.
single paycheck
Most people are
and
laymen's. Yeah.
and but then on top of that their lawyer is saying like listen, if we go to court there's a chance we could lose, and there is
Mm-hmm.
that chance. And so I mean, I don't know, like people also themselves need to be brave and more less risk averse and
Well,
say, listen, we're going to go to court and we're going to
that's the
sue and we're going
problem.
to win, because it
Most
does happen.
But
well,
yeah, but that's the problem. Most people will just see a big sum of money like guaranteed, and they'll take that guarantee instead of the possibility of more or less. When people go gambling, they don't keep going and keep going and keep going. Like if someone was addicted, they find a time to like stop. Like, oh, I got this big win or whatever. Maybe if for them it could be like $20. They'll stop because they at least got something.
Oh no, there, no, there are people who are addicted to gambling and they will literally spend every penny they
Yeah.
have on gambling.
But most people they'll
So
get
that does
something, and then
happen.
yeah, for most people they'll get something at least, let's say like
I think
$100, and
looping
they'll
it back
stop.
to
Yeah, that's most
looping
people.
it back to the settlements. I mean, you can't if I'm on a job site or something. I'm in construction. If I'm doing some construction thing for whatever reason, and I'm on a job site and then a skid steer runs over my leg. Oh my God, my femur's broken. This is horrible. If you take away regulation and whatever else um that protects me in that case, and I'm left to sue for the liability, right? I'm sitting in a hospital bed with mounting medical bills, unable to live my life, waiting on this lawsuit. You're saying that people should not be afraid to settle, okay? But like these lawsuits can go on for years, right? So
Yeah.
I'm left in the wind for this entire time, without the
Oh,
means to
listen.
pay for this, without the means to work, without the means to
Oh,
live my
listen.
life.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree. What I'm saying is we should make it easier for them to win and things like that. Like I don't know how to do it necessarily because like
Sure.
I'm kind of dumb when it comes to that
Well,
stuff. But like I do like the problem is that it's just too hard to sue. Like honestly, like I don't think you should be able to go to court. Like I think law should be so easy that laymen can do it, and the only reason why you'd want to hire a lawyer is because you just don't have the time to do it. Like I think you should be able to
well,
represent yourself in court and things like
well,
that.
you can. It's just it's frowned upon, and it's
No, you
almost
can't.
guaranteed. Well, and it's
Actually,
frowned.
no. A lot of judges will not hear your case unless you have a lawyer.
A lot of but yeah, but you can in a lot of cases. Well, there's a lot of judges that won't let you because it's seen as a waste of time because you're not practicing the law. You
Maybe
don't
in
know what you're
traffic
doing.
court,
Well, not even necessarily in traffic
but
court,
like
even in not maybe not necessarily criminal court, but civil court. If you want to represent yourself, most of the time
that's
you
traffic court.
well, I guess traffic court. I guess I was thinking maybe I don't know, but anyways, like you can represent yourself without a lawyer. It's just seen as a waste of time because you don't know what the
That's
fuck's going on half
no,
the
that's what I'm
time.
saying. Like no, that's what I'm saying. Like you can represent yourself like in traffic court or like petty fines court, like parking, like traffic or parking offenses. You can usually represent yourself and judges won't care. But like as soon as it comes to anything like anything heavily legal, like most civil cases, you can't represent yourself. You need a lawyer immediately, and judges won't let you do that because the law is so complicated. And what I'm saying is that we need to make laws less complicated, less convoluted, so that anyone could read the code and understand the code and then do it themselves, basically.
Who has the time to read the codes?
That's what I'm
Or the
saying.
want.
I'm saying.
Well, no, even
Oh my
like,
god.
but like the problem is no one either has a want to do it, or like even if they were super simple, most people probably wouldn't know the laws by hand anyways, because most people don't care. They feel like they follow the law regardless.
I'm saying we should make it simple enough so that people could do that.
They can.
That's what I'm literally
They
saying.
can, and even if we had like hold on, and Delta, even if we had like 5 laws in the books and that was it, and they were super fucking simple, like hey,
that would
just
be too many,
and just say like hey, don't take anything. Most people wouldn't care enough to
don't
read
murder,
anything.
don't take, don't rape, and I don't know. Literally, we only need 3 laws: don't murder, don't rape, and don't take.
Well,
That's
the laws end up going. Most laws follow those things. They just have specific statutes to dictate what that actually means. Like when it comes to stealing,
well,
like
no, most. Well, no. Well, kinda.
Yeah,
like when it comes to theft, they have all sorts of definitions of what property is and things like that.
Yeah.
But like it gets super convoluted.
And also
mostly,
what theft is
it's
as well.
Mostly because
like there's wage
yeah,
theft,
but
there's
it's
property
super
theft,
convoluted.
there's so many different kinds of thefts, as well as what
Yes,
property
but it
is.
It doesn't have to be this convoluted. And the reason why
It
it's
has to.
convoluted is because usually it's no, it doesn't. It doesn't have to be this convoluted.
It kind of has to. It does, yeah, because it has to be very specific. Like
How is theft
hold on.
complicated?
So you love being very specific with how you talk and what you mean, right? The law is just
Yes.
that. It's super specific on what it means. It tries to be. That's why it's so complicated.
So one problem with law is that when you read codes, it'll cite other codes, and then those codes will cite other codes, and it'll go on and on and on and on and on. It like I don't think that's how law should be. Like law should be super simple.
It's just references of everything, what it means, right? It's just referencing on like, all right, what does this specific thing mean?
Imagine if you were reading a dictionary and you went to the definition of rabbit and it said see whatever, I forget what the Latin name for Latin is, but it said see this, like go to this part of the dictionary, and then you go to another part of the dictionary and then it says see chordata, which is like any animal with a backbone and things like that. Like that would be too much just to see what a rabbit is, right?
Well, there's some things in the dictionary that kind of do something like that. They'd be like, see number like 213 or something like that.
Yeah, but it's usually referenced on the same page just by a different definition. It's not like you're flipping from one side of the dictionary to the other.
There's some cases
or
that's like
having
that.
to go get a different dictionary all the way.
Well, no, but like laws like to be very, very hyper specific. And sometimes they like to reference other things that have already been established or are in the legal code in some way, so that way you can flip there and see exactly what that means. I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. It's inefficient, you could say, but in a way it has its own type of efficiency, in which case it doesn't have to restate exactly what this code meant, and then the subcodes of and everything that's going on with that. But the law likes to be very specific, and I think that's a good thing. And you like specificity, so I don't see your problem with this.
No, I have no problem with specificity. The problem is that it is so complex to read the law that it is impossible for any one person to understand the law to the degree where they could literally follow all laws perfectly because of how complex it is. Like,
but the thing
it's okay to be specific. Hold on. It's okay to be specific, but there's no reason it needs to be as complex as it is. There's no reason.
I'm going to be honest. Most laws are almost common sense. Like, hey, don't steal, don't do whatever, don't jaywalk, whatever. Even though jaywalking is not really.
Oh boy,
jaywalking is not.
I could pull up some fucking ridiculous laws.
Oh no, absolutely. You can pull up some ridiculous like old laws or current laws or whatever, some shit like that. But most laws are that you can be prosecuted for. They're pretty common sense, right? Like, hey, don't go into the gas station across the street and like rob them, right? Like, that's pretty common sense to not do that or to take something, right? That's not yours. Or speed in
I guess.
the school zone, right? Like, these are common sense things.
Speeding shouldn't be a law. We should be allowed to speed
Well,
however fast we want.
I think in some cases speeding should be
Where's
allowed.
the victim?
Well, it's more so like potential victims or whatever of other drivers or.
Oh, I love it when we bring up potential victims, because if you buy a knife, what about the potential victims of you stabbing people?
Well, no,
Why don't
so
we
like,
ban them then?
So like I would say on like highways and the likes of those, most like I think there should not it'd be like the Autobahn. There's no speed limit. It's just go as fast as you want to go, right? But when it comes to like neighborhoods and school zones and stuff, I think speed limits exist for a reason in those cases. Or like maybe like inner towns or something like that, where there may be a lot of foot traffic or children around or whatever, in which case speed limits make sense in those kind of areas.
I saw a video the other day of someone speeding through a school zone and hitting a little kid, and I just sat there thinking, oh yeah, those school zone laws totally stop that kid from getting hit by that car. But I will say that guy did go to jail because he hit a kid.
So speed limits tend to give the general public of like, hey, you can be within this like this range, because I don't know any place that will literally like give you a fine for going like 1 over. Most places have like you can go at least like 5 over. And
you have not been on a military base, which is funny because
no,
your dad was
I
in the
have.
military.
No, I have. It's just
yeah. The MPs will literally pull you over for going 1 mile over the speed limit and give you a ticket. I'm not
I would
fucking
say,
with you.
I mean, like more so regular. I mean, like more so like the regular public in terms of like regular roadways that aren't government, like the federal government, right? Because I know I've heard of stories about the MPs being like absolute fucking dicks in terms of speed limits. But
I'm just saying it is possible though.
Yeah, it's possible, but most people tend to stay within a 5 mile per hour range of lower and under, or under and over. And most cops tend to keep that sort of leeway, but for the public, generally they stay within that 5 like 5 under 5 over. I don't remember the exact wording. Like error range or something like that. Saying. Yeah, the error range.
The margin.
Yeah, the margin of error. While some people will go over, most people don't, and most people tend to follow the law. There's always, because you could say the same thing about any law, right? What's the point of having laws for rape or murder if people aren't going to follow it anyways, right?
Well, but the problem is that with murder and rape, there are actual victims, measurable victims, every single time that law is broken. When it comes to speeding, people do get killed from, people speeding into something and hitting somebody, but it's not every single time. If every single time you went 56 miles an hour in a 55 zone and you killed somebody, I would agree with that. But the problem is that that's not the case. And in fact, you can get killed at any speed. My grandfather was run over by someone going 20 miles an hour, and
yeah, but like,
it is what it is. Like,
well, the point.
Listen,
well, hold on.
Hold on. No. You hold on. I concede that speeding does kill people disproportionately than underspeeding, but just because it does happen more doesn't mean it happens all the time. Whereas with murder, literally every time someone breaks the law for not murdering somebody is dead every single time, 100%.
So the point isn't about going at this speed or whatever isn't going to kill someone, because it still can, right? With your grandfather or uncle or whoever you said, yeah, yes. it will kill someone, sure. But the point is reflex, right? If you're going at a lower speed, you can stop a lot quicker, and generally you're less likely to hit someone versus going 60.
That has nothing to do with what I said.
Well, no,
that has nothing to do with what I said. What I'm saying is every time someone you break the murder law, as in don't murder, every time you break that, there is someone dead every single time. Axiomatically, it has to function that way. Whereas with speeding, there is no victim. Not every single time there's a victim,
I don't
and
necessarily
that's a
agree.
problem.
I would, for me, even if there's not necessarily a direct victim within that moment, it's still there still needs to be something in place to try to prevent it for the regular public as much as possible. Because of course
So
people are
we
going.
should have victimless. So we should have victimless crimes.
In some situations, sure, but people tend to use the
I
same thing
don't
for.
agree at all.
I mean, sure, but people tend to use the same thing for like drugs, which I don't. I think we should legalize all drugs and all firearms, and any kind of weaponry you should be able to own. But I think when it comes to speed limits, it's a very special kind of thing.
I don't like victimless crimes because it allows for government actors to act in arbitrary fashions. Because, for example, I've driven on I-5 many times where state troopers are driving at like 90 miles an hour down the highway and they're
Yeah.
not pulling anyone over.
Well,
Meanwhile, you drive. There are other days where there's one state trooper pulling everyone over who's going 70 and it's 65 on I-5 in Oregon.
well, I've already
And
said that
it's just completely
highways.
arbitrary.
I've already said that highways and the such, like freeways, interstates, or whatever, that they should be like autobahns. No, they can go as fast as you want. I've already said.
Well, I know, but
Yeah, but like give me give me an argument
uh,
on why you can go 90 in a fucking school zone. What's your argument for that? Like just because
I don't think I'm gonna be honest. I don't think people would go 90 in a school zone. I don't think people would, mostly because
people go like 60 down my neighborhood, and there's children always playing in the streets. Of course, people are gonna like. There's gonna be the fucking wacko going 90 in fucking neighborhoods and school zones.
Then what needs? Wait. Then what needs to happen is they need to redesign the street so that people don't want to drive that way because
Government funding.
How roads are built.
So more government funding.
Well,
and roads.
Okay, we're living in the real world, Sonic. We're not living, but like. Okay, so with roads, there is a natural kind of speed to how roads operate, and we put speed limits on them to kind of slow people down, but like that doesn't really work, and people will still speed anyways. And the handful of cops that go out and try to pull people over, there's not enough of them. A better way to solve speeding issues is to redesign roads to not want people to go as fast. So put speed bumps, for example, on them, tightening up the road lanes so that cars are tighter together. Because when cars are tighter together, people are less likely to want to speed because they're afraid of hitting other people and things like that.
I agree with some of the stuff.
Ideas.
I like how like Europe does their roadways, especially the Netherlands. I agree. We should definitely do this kind of stuff. Have more medians and shit. Tighten the roads. Have less roads overall.
And so I don't think the way to solve the speeding issue is to have a man with a gun occasionally pull over some random person who isn't hurting anyone and forcibly extracting money out of them as some sort of incentive-based punishment. It's an incentive by taking money away from them to not want to do it again because they don't want to have more money taken from them.
Yeah.
I think a better way to do it is just to design the road for that speed limit, which we could do very easily.
Honestly, not in the U.S. No. It would have to take a whole cultural revolution of some kind to change people's ideas of cars.
That's okay. But that's what I'm saying though, is that like this is my idea. Let's go out there and preach it.
I mean, yeah, I agree to an extent, but I agree to an extent, but I do think that with speed limits in some cases, like neighborhoods or school zones, they are necessary. While it won't stop everyone, it will prevent the majority of people from doing it as to not break the law.
I just don't agree. I don't think we should have the state punishing people for committing an act that isn't hurting anyone.
All right.
I don't agree with that. I don't think that is justice.
We can agree to disagree on this, I guess.
No, I'm not disagreeing. Listen, justice is someone got injured and we need to rectify that. And justice is not, the hall monitor is out and you're out, past class. Like, that's not justice. There's nothing just about that.
We can agree to disagree, I guess.
Well, I mean, here's another thing. it causes problems. It causes problems, and it causes people not to trust the state, not to trust cops, because now instead of thinking, oh, good, there's a cop, he, if anything goes wrong, he can help me. Now when people see cops, they're thinking, oh, they're just
Well,
looking for a reason to
well,
give me a ticket.
hold on. Most people end up speeding on like and getting pulled over on like highways and freeways and interstates and the shit like that, right? In which case, then yeah, you end up getting pulled over, and then you have that stressful interaction with law enforcement. But I want to make them like autobahns and just simply have these speed limits in
I know,
neighborhoods.
but what I'm saying is that's how it is right now, and that is not a healthy way to do it right now. Like, especially right now when people have such a low trust in the government and cops and stuff, and I'm first and foremost among them. Like, this is crazy coming from me, but like, we shouldn't design a system that incentivizes people to trust cops and the government even less. Like, that is just not smart.
Meanwhile, you also want less government and cops overall.
Well, I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. If we did it the way, like, if we design roads the way I was saying, we wouldn't need as many cops. Like, or better yet, we could actually be putting cops on actual duties that are actually beneficial and actually help people, rather than are just out being the hall monitor and extracting money from people.
All right. We can agree to disagree on this, but we have hit our mark.
That's a weak sauce argument just to say, I don't have a good argument, and you're probably right.
Well, no, we can talk more about this on Thursday, but we have hit our hour mark, in which case we normally
True.
cut off.
True.
So is there any
True.
media? Since
I'm just gonna. Is there any media?
Any media?
I'm just gonna, for one, I'm just gonna say I'm gonna strike this as another Delta victory. I'm gonna put it on the side of my bomber.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. I'm just fucking with you.
Just
That was a good discussion. We should continue it though on Thursday.
Yeah, well, right in we have so many things we need to fucking continue because we keep adding new shit to the fucking list.
Didn't we run out the other day? So like, don't bitch about it.
Well,
like,
no,
we ran out.
But like from our last discussion, I'm pretty sure we added something to that, and we didn't talk about it today. And then I added something today as well, or yesterday, or something.
Hey, it's better to have too much to talk about than to show up and be like,
Yeah, let's see. So we did. So the thing was food and regulation. We did talk about that. Let's see.
Yeah.
Government.
And we've expanded the discussion.
Government bureaucracies, federated governments and stuff. And one of McGuire's stuff. And then there were some things that I think we never talked about that I put on, but whatever. Anyways, so what was your media?
I don't know. I've just been playing Fallout, and it's fucking brutal. I got
The first
raped by a bunch of rats in a cave.
The first one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fucking brutal.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's not fucking Bethesda. They don't hold your hands.
Yeah. You literally can get killed in the first cave by the rats. You can get mauled to death.
Yeah. A lot of people got stuck on that from what I remember. A game that I've been playing recently is I Have No Mouth, Yet I Must Scream. It's like,
what's that about?
There's this AI. His name is Am. You can look up what that stands for. I'm fucking retarded, but he got created. It's artificial super intelligence. So the idea was to help humanity, but then he ended up killing humanity and keeping 5 people alive. And they can't die. And he tortures them for infinity until eventually they find a way to distract him, and they end up killing each other successfully. Huh?
Isn't this a vault from Fallout? Isn't this literally the plot of one of the vaults from Fallout 3?
I don't know, but
I think it's Vault 112.
I know there was like a plant vault, right? There was a plant. They all turned to plants.
In Vegas. Let me look it up real quick. It was you had to go in to save your dad because he was in it, and the not Werner von Braun version of Fallout.
I know you're talking about, like the dream machines, right?
It was Tranquility Lane Vault.
Yeah. Well, this is different from that because this isn't a dream reality. This is just straight up reality, and you can feel. And I don't think they were tortured for infinity. I think they were just forced to like live these all these alternative lives, right? Until eventually you end up killing them all, in some form or fashion, either
It,
through your
it
own hand or
was
through the
it was Vault.
Chinese.
It was Vault 112, and the guy, the German, the not German Werner von Braun.
Yeah.
His name was Stanislaus Braun.
Yeah.
Definitely not Werner von Braun.
Yeah, but you should check it out. It's a pretty interesting read, and then they made a game about it, but it's not quite the same. They definitely did a lot of liberties, and it's a point and click adventure game. Very old, but very fun. Very good read as well. You should check it out.
Okay,
Yeah. All right. Is that it?
that's it.
All right. Adios, amigos. And have a good night. All the